Well, LSU football started spring practice today on Tuesday, and I got a lot of questions. So let's start with the defensive side of the ball because when it comes to LSU's defense going into this season, I got nothing but questions.
You are Locked On LSU, your daily podcast on the LSU Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
All right, what's up, y'all? Welcome into Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. And you can also check us out on YouTube as well. Search Locked On LSU in that YouTube search bar. Hit the red subscribe button, and then you'll get notifications as soon as new episodes of the podcast drop. My name is Caroline Fenton. I am your host, and today's edition of Locked On LSU is brought to you by Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little bit further? Have you ever wondered what adventure could be around the next corner? Take the Nissan Rogue, the Nissan Pathfinder, or the Nissan Armada and go find your next big adventure. Check them all out today at nissanusa.com. All right, let's get into it because LSU football started spring football practice today, and it's like, I know we had the Super Bowl, like a month ago, but I'm already like itching for real football. I'm like, enough of the combine, enough of NFL free agency, enough of talking about football. I want football. And I know we don't have real football. We won't have real games here for another, 5 months? Ooh, knife to the heart. But it's nice to at least have some sort of football being played on a field and something that we can talk about. But we'll have a lot of little tidbits that come out from spring practice, takeaways from practice, things that Brian Kelly says and his availabilities with the media. But as spring practice kicks off today, I want to start off with some questions that I have. And I want to start on the defensive side of the ball. I fully intended to do all of my questions in one episode, but I just got far too many questions for them. Pack them all in one episode on both sides of the ball. So let's start with the defensive side of the ball. The reason I start on the defense is because I have significantly more questions about the defense than I do the offense. And you might be thinking to yourself, Caroline, you just lost your Heisman Trophy winning quarterback into the best wide receivers in college football. How in the world could you have more questions defensively? Well, you overhauled your entire coaching staff on the defensive side of the ball. While you got change up at receiver, while there's change up at the quarterback position, while there's even change up at play caller offensively, you still get more continuity on that side of the football, at least I think. An entirely new coaching staff, that changes everything. So Matt House and his entire coaching staff is out. Blake Baker, Kevin Peoples, Bo Davis, Corey Raymond, and company, it's their show now. They're running the show. So really, just overall questions about the defense as a whole stem from this new coaching staff. How do they go about things? What is Blake Baker's style? How much of that are we going to see within the first few days and few weeks of spring practice? I think the biggest thing is for me that I do wonder some of the conversations that they're having behind closed doors. How much are Blake Baker and the rest of these defensive coaches, how much are they forced to kind of go back to the basics? Like, how much are they going to have to hit the ground running simply with fundamentals? Because that's what LSU's defense struggled so much with last season, with silly things that should be easy. Fundamentals, the fundamentals of tackling. I mean, how many times did we see missed tackles, broken tackles, so on and so forth? I mean, all the freaking time. What was the stat against Ole Miss? Over 300 yards that Ole Miss gained from missed or broken tackles? 300 yards? That is obscene. So the tackling was bad, the technique was bad, the form was bad. The defensive line for the most part couldn't get off their blocks. So I do wonder, how much going back to the basics are we going to have to do? How much relearning or reteaching rather, is this coaching staff going to have to do with this defense, just simply because of how fundamentally bad they were last season? Just the technique was lazy. It was bad. And I'm not putting that on the players. I put that on the coaching staff wholeheartedly. So I wonder, where do you go from there? Let's talk about position specifics. The defensive line will be what keeps me up at night from now until September at the beginning of the season. You lose Maason Smith and Mekhi Wingo, and you essentially are left with a lot of questions, at least on the interior of the defensive line. So one question I have is, who emerges from this group that, you have bodies, but you don't necessarily have experience? You don't have a lot of veterans. You have Sean Washington coming in. He originally committed to Georgia. He took a detour to JUCO. Now he's coming in this transfer portal class. You have Kimo Makanele, who's served as kind of a reserve offensive lineman over the past couple of years. He's moving from the offensive side of the ball to the defensive side of the ball. You signed Dominic McKinley, but you don't get him until fall ball, so kind of just put him to the side for now. You're returning Jacobian Guillory, who had limited snaps. You also return Savion Jones, but I would expect him to play a little bit more on the outside, more of a defensive end. You have Deshaun Womack, which I think is going to be huge. So, and you've got a couple of early enrollees in Ahmad Bro and Gabe Relaford, but again, those are defensive ends. Those aren't defensive tackles. So whether it's a Deshaun Womack, who I expect to take a much bigger step forward this season, I expect to see more from him this season, while you're returning a Jacobian Guillory, while you're bringing in a Sean Washington, while you're, moving a Kimo Makanele over from one side of the ball to the other. Yeah, that's bodies, but that's not a whole lot of a proven track record. You need to. I don't think that it's even up for debate, nor do I think it's that crazy to say that you absolutely positively must get a transfer, even two, at the defensive tackle position. And no, you're not going to get an All-American. No, you're not going to replace Mekhi Wingo and Maason Smith in the spring transfer portal window, but you just need bodies in depth at this point. So I wonder who's going to emerge from that group. Bo Davis is a wonderful coach, one of the best defensive line coaches in all of college football. Kevin Peoples, the same way. So I'm encouraged at least about what they can do. I'm excited. I'm optimistic about how they can coach up some of these more raw and inexperienced players. But again, like they're not magicians, right? They can't just wave their magical defensive line wand over all of these players and say, okay, boom, now you are absolute, first team All-Americans and you're going to be top 10 picks in the NFL draft next year. No, like that's not how that works. You still need to work with talent. Even the best of coaches can't coach up players that maybe just aren't at that level yet, that aren't at an SEC caliber level. I don't know if these players are. Deshaun Womack, I think we can say that he absolutely has the makings of getting to that point. We just haven't seen that yet, and that's okay. He's only going into his second season. I want to see a big step from him, but also who else from this group emerges? Is it going to be a Sean Washington that uses his size and at least the experience that he's gotten at the JUCO level to really take a step forward and be a starter? Is it Jacobian Guillory, who's kind of been sitting in the shadows, who now gets his opportunity to shine? I mean, at least excited to see what Bo Davis can do with that position room. But Lord, oh my goodness, that is going to give me anxiety. That room gives. We know how important winning the battles in the trenches are. Right now, I don't feel incredibly encouraged about you winning those battles in the interior on the defensive side of the ball. But coming up next, we've got more position battles on the defensive side of the ball, and it's kind of the same messaging. You have bodies, but you don't have a lot of experience. So who's going to emerge and who's going to take this job? We'll get into that coming up next after just a couple words from our sponsors. All right, I want to tell you about FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Because right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's right. That's $150 if your bet wins. And you can bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. I know tonight on Tuesday night, we've got the Boston Celtics heading to the Cleveland Cavaliers. If you open FanDuel on your computer, on the app on your phone, you'll be able to see a lot of really fun parlays that are already set up for you on the FanDuel Sportsbook app. One thing that I am liking is Jaylen Brown over 2.5 assists. I think that's good money right there. But that's my take. But do it how you want to do it, and do it with FanDuel. Visit fanduel.com/locked on and shoot your shot. Again, that is fanduel.com/locked on. And new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. FanDuel, official sportsbook partner of the NBA. All right, rolling along here, Locked On LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts. And of course, we are part of the Locked On Network, your team every single day. And Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV and the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league. So find Locked On Sports Today right now, available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, the cornerback position is one that I am going to be following heavily, and one, frankly, that I have a lot of questions about. My questions about the cornerback position are very similar to that of the defensive line position. Who emerges from this group at least early? And let's keep in mind, it's spring practice. You still have fall ball. It is the very beginning of spring practice. A lot of these players are going to be recovering from injury, just kind of getting back into the swing of things. So don't over analyze anything that happens on day one in spring practice, but as you go throughout these next couple of weeks, you're going to want to start seeing the kind of the starting roster take form. And I'm looking at the cornerbacks. Again, bodies, not a lot of experience, not a whole lot proven there. Looking at J.K. Johnson, of course, the former Ohio State transfer who transferred into LSU this past season, but he's been riddled with injury and haven't seen a whole lot from J.K. Johnson. So if he can stay healthy, he's one in contention for a starting corner position. But also another former Buckeye is Jair Brown, who transferred in this 2024 transfer portal window, originally from New Orleans, in the second half of his high school career. I believe it was before his junior year of high school. Moved to Cincinnati, and he ultimately ended up going to Ohio State. He's been in Ohio State the last 2 years. Played in a few games in his first season, but that production kind of dropped off in his second season. Appeared only in 4 games. Was only recorded 1 tackle on the season against Michigan State. So incredibly raw there. One that, sure, you look at the just sheer talent and the physicality and the height and the weight and what he can do on paper. Yeah, I mean, absolutely, he's going to be one that I'm going to be following in spring practice. But again, not a ton of experience. And then you return Javian Toviano, Ashton Stamps, Jeremiah Hughes, all three of them coming in for their sophomore season. And Ashton Stamps and Javian Toviano, I think, are incredibly, interesting players to follow here, because I think they got more experience this past season than Matt House and Brian Kelly ever expected them to or ever wanted them to. What happens when 4 of your starters go down with injury at some point in the season, whether it was before the season or in the midpoint of the season. I mean, duty calls. Like, you're gonna have to put the freshmen out there if those are the only bodies that you have. So while that was a weakness in the middle of the season last year, I think it's a strength that plays into it now, at least for Ashton Stamps and Javian Toviano, of having that, few game sample size, of getting in-game work against high level, high quality of opponents. So that'll be interesting to kind of shake out. Also, like, where do you want Javian Toviano to play? I know last season he practiced at corner. He also practiced at safety. He played corner in the games that he needed to play in this past season. Do you view him more as a safety? Is he needed more so in the cornerback room? If they decide to switch him up a little bit more, like some days he's playing safety, some days he's playing corner, is it out of necessity? Does he have to be at this in this position group just because you don't have the numbers? It'll be interesting to see. That's one question I have. Where do you want Javian Toviano to be? Zy Alexander, who ended up being really great for you this past season. Of course, he tore his ACL at the midpoint of this past season. He'll be out for the spring. But as Brian Kelly told, I believe it was Wilson Alexander of the Baton Rouge Advocate, he'll be back in the summer. So at least right now, barring any setbacks with Zy Alexander's recovery, we'll see. And you got a slew of freshmen coming in. PJ Woodland, the 3-star out of Mississippi, Jawan Johnson from Lafayette, Bernard Causey from New Orleans. You got a lot of bodies in there. Got a lot of bodies in there with not a whole lot of in-game experience. And that's an incredibly important position, as we learned this past season. When you got a Swiss cheese DB, things don't turn out so well. So how Corey Raymond works with those players, how he's able to develop some of the younger guys and have them playing their, carve out their specific role. And not even just the younger guys, but how he's able to get the most out of some of these older players, maybe like a J.K. Johnson, who's a few more years removed from high school, how much more that he can do. So the cornerback room, I think, will be fascinating. It's one that I am worried about, but I'm not as worried about corner as I am the D line, because I think the D line, specifically in the interior D tackle, you just need bodies. Corner, you have bodies, but let's see how quality those bodies truly are. And you're going to have to find that out to know what you're targeting in the spring transfer portal period. Harold Perkins is also a massive question of mine. And not even just Harold Perkins, but the linebacker position as a whole. We'll get into that coming up next after just a few words from our sponsors. All right, I want to tell you about Nissan. Are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. So the Nissan Rogue is perfect for city drives and great escapes. Class exclusive Google built-in is always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. I know that I have it in my car, and it is so nice to not have to use, your hands or anything. You don't have to take your eyes off the road. I mean, gone are the days of connecting your phone. Google Assistant, Google Maps, and Google Play Store are built right in to the 12.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. The 2024 Rogue is the perfect midsize crossover for your next adventure. But if you need something a little bit bigger, maybe you have a few more passengers, try out the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder. It has room for up to 8, an expansive cargo capacity, and advanced available 4x4 capability. So that 4-wheel drive is perfect. I know if you're going to be driving in the snow, or maybe you like to camp, you're going to be driving on some of those off roads and those gravel roads. There's 284 horsepower and up to 6,000 pounds towing. So when adventure calls, the Pathfinder is there to answer. So take the Nissan Rogue or the Nissan Pathfinder and go find your next big adventure. Go to shopnissanusa.com. Again, shopnissanusa.com. All right, rolling along here, locked on LSU. Thank you for making us your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcasts. All right, talking defensive questions as we head into spring practice. As we know, as Brian Kelly reported to Wilson Alexander of the Baton Rouge Advocate, Harold Perkins will be moved back into inside linebacker. I expressed my feelings on this on an earlier podcast. You can find that on your preferred podcast platform and on YouTube. I hate it. I hate it. We saw what Harold Perkins looks like on the inside, and it wasn't very good. Go rewatch that Florida State game. Like, if you are all gung-ho and excited about this move, go rewatch the Florida State game and tell me how many times you noticed Harold Perkins. Because I promise you, it's going to be fewer than the number of fingers on your hand. So I think it's dumb. Frank, I just think it's dumb. But, how Blake Baker works with Harold Perkins, I'm really intrigued to see throughout spring practice because we've seen, even at LSU, Blake Baker really get the most out of specifically the linebacker position. So, I mean, look, I'll have faith in this coaching staff, but you're going to have to prove it to me before I all of a sudden give you the benefit of the doubt. But what I also think is very interesting in a Blake Baker defense, instead of the Sam linebacker position, like the strong side kind of hybrid Sam nickel, which is kind of the role that not kind of it was the role that Harold Perkins was playing after that Florida State game. They moved him out from the inside, moved him to Sam linebacker, just kind of that hybrid linebacker. So in Blake Baker's defense, that's what's called the star linebacker. Now, frankly, that's not a position that I had ever heard of before. Supposedly there's defenses across the SEC that run that kind of defense that utilize the star linebacker. I believe there's even defenses in the NFL that use it. And that is kind of your your linebacker that's kind of a defensive back linebacker kind of hybrid. Like, you can play strong side linebacker off the line of scrimmage, but you can also drop back into coverage and cover that slot receiver. So I'm interested to see who plays that role, or he even is in contention for that role, who plays snaps at that role. Honestly, the more research that I did about the star linebacker position, the more and more I feel like that's a role for Sage Ryan. That Sage Ryan has been able to play, has been so versatile as a defensive back. He can play safety if he needs to. He can play corner if he needs to, but he also has that size that he can be a run stopper if he needs to be. If he needs to be closer up at the line of scrimmage, but he's got the speed to go toe to toe with a slot receiver. So if that's just kind of the early candidate that I would say, like if I had to pick someone today who would be filling in that role, I would say Sage Ryan feels like an easy one that just comes to mind for me. Now, a few things you might be thinking, you idiot, Sage Ryan doesn't play linebacker. I know that. I know. Sage Ryan, excuse me, the star linebacker position traditionally is played by defensive backs, maybe your larger defensive backs. Um, and as I said, I'm still learning this position. So if I'm wrong here, correct me in the comments. I feel like a Jamal Adams is that kind of player, kind of like a box safety, bigger, bigger bodied kind of defensive back, but still has speed, but has the size. So I Sage Ryan would be my early pick. Now, I think that they're probably going to try several different players at that position, whether it's from the linebacker room or from the DB room. And if Sage Ryan is more so needed in the secondary than he is at the star linebacker position, then great, that's where he needs to be. If that's where he's best suited, if that's where he's going to help you win football games, keep him in the secondary. Like that isn't my campaign for Sage Ryan to play in that role. It just seemed like kind of a seamless fit there, but that's one of my questions is who is going to play that role, since it is a role that is more specific to Blake Baker's defense and new to us as LSU fans with this new Blake Baker defense. So a lot of questions, and questions that I don't frankly know if we'll have the answers to after just a couple days of spring practice or in spring practice as a whole. I think one thing that spring practice tends to do, for me at least, is create even more questions. Sometimes that's a good thing because there are players that you hadn't considered, maybe true freshmen coming in or players that aren't necessarily household names amongst LSU fans that really show really impressive things and flashes of really impressive things in spring practice. And you're like, okay, well, great. Then now your job is that much harder because you have a guy that could play in that role. But sometimes it's more questions on the other side of the spectrum of who in the world is going to play this position because you've either got injuries, knock on wood, the defensive line is not an area that you can afford any sort of injuries, and you have to accommodate for that. You can't just be going into the season keeping your fingers crossed that, all of your defensive linemen can be held together with bubble gum and duct tape. But also, are there players that you thought were going to take that next step forward this year, whether it be, a true freshman last year coming into their second year and you expect them to take that next leap forward, and maybe they just don't. Like maybe something's just not clicking, especially for young players that are now going to have maybe their second defensive coordinator, second position coach in 2 years. That's hard. There's a transition time. Another thing as we talk about the defense that I do want to point out here is these practices, like if you're doing 7-on-7s, they're geared to the offense, right? Like you're going to see Garrett Nussmeier make crazy throws and receivers make crazy catches. And I don't think it's necessarily anything about the defense. I think it's just, those kind of drills are more so just geared toward the offense because there's no pass rush. So keep that in mind whenever we start to hear stories come out about spring practice, but it'll be fun. We've got football and it is back, even if it's just the spring, even if it's just practice. Football's football, and I'm here for it. That's going to do it for me today. Thank you for making Locked On LSU your first listen every single day. We're free and available wherever you get your podcast. Coming up on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU, offensive questions, the wide receiver position, the running back position, and of course, most importantly, Garrett Nussmeier. All of that coming up on tomorrow's edition of Locked On LSU.